Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good day and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. I'm Heather Hayes, pastor at First Presbyterian Church here in Cedar Rapids, and I will be your moderator for today's discussion. 4 short weeks ago, people across the United States were reeling yet again from the news of another school shooting. Even as many were celebrating a holiday centered around the emotion of love, word trickled out about a tragedy in the making. It wasn't long before the responses to the shooting began to flood the news media and media feeds. Some of the strongest voices, even in those first days, were to be found amongst the Stoneman Douglas students. Sarah Chadwick caught the media's attention just the day after, responding in critique to President Trump's tweet with a tweet of her own. A week later, hundreds of students marched on the state capitol in Florida demanding a legislative response to gun violence in the schools. And other students traveled to Washington, D.C. to speak with President Trump and other legislatures, seeking a legislative and policy response to what seems to have become too common of an occurrence. On that same day, the students that in Florida were speaking, students throughout the country staged walkouts in support of their traumatized peers, including some that occurred in our own city. Further actions have included the sharing of the Never Again hashtag, a national school walkout in March, and March for Our Lives, scheduled to take place in Washington, D.C. on March 24th. To further explore this phenomenon, I have with me on today's panel Kyra Lagrange, student at Franklin Middle School. Welcome.
Thank you.
Walker Ochs, who is a student at Washington High School. Welcome, Walker.
Thank you.
And David Bullwinkle, a professor at Kirkwood Community College. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Heather, Kyra, and Walker.
Good morning.
Thank you for being with us today. Well, Kyra, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about the events at Franklin the week after the Parkland shooting?
Well, a lot of students at our school really just felt really mad and upset with what happened, and they just really wanted their voices to be heard. And so it was actually a pretty spontaneously planned out thing where the night before students were just like, oh, we should do something about this. And so they planned a walkout for our school, and we got the idea from Washington High School actually, and it was just something that we wanted to do.
So it came about pretty spontaneously. How did you get the word out among students?
Well, someone made a group chat online and shared a lot of information about it, and a little bit, I believe it was like 10 minutes before, they announced it on the intercom that they would allow the walkout and that it could be a school-wide choice if you'd want to or not. Mm-hmm.
So at what point did teachers become aware and administration get involved? Do you remember?
I think they more became, I wasn't around, I was at another place when I think teachers and staff started hearing about it. I think they heard from students telling them or just talking about it. And, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what did you hope to accomplish? What did your group hope to accomplish with the walkout?
Well, we wanted students to know that they have a voice and, you know, that they can be heard and that their opinions really do matter, because sometimes, you know, because we're kids, our voices don't really get put out there and we don't really feel like we have a say in a lot of matters.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Now, Kyra said that they kind of got wind of it from what was happening over at Washington. Walker, can you share a little bit about how things transpired or moved forward at Washington High School?
Yes, I can. It was in my sociology class. 20, 30 students were talking about doing a walkout. We had a free day in that class. And at first, it was just an idea. It wasn't really something we were planning to do. But within like a week, we had actually come up with a plan, how to, deal with the administration, how to talk to teachers. We even set up a box and a microphone in that room just in case. And then, like, the day after we decided we were going to do it, I was called to the office, and I spoke with the principal directly about the walkout. He was very supportive of it, indirectly, because I don't think he's allowed to just tell students that they can go. But he was completely okay with it, and he definitely understood our message. So he worked with me within that following week to set up the whole thing, and he was, I think, surprised by how well planned it was, and me and the students that spoke at the walkout spent a lot of time working on what we were going to say, just to make sure that it was, not too volatile, but also got our message across well. So it was honestly a lot of support from staff and administration that got the walkout to occur. Without them, specific teachers and the principal and the vice principal, it wouldn't have happened. So
that's good. And what were some of their concerns or the things that you worked together to move through?
Well, Mr. Klein, our principal, had worked at a previous school where there had been a walkout and it turned violent. So he was very concerned about that, about controlling students and making sure that they behaved correctly. So we worked together, and that's the whole non-volatile thing, to make sure that what we were saying, and especially what we said in the announcements when we told kids to walk out, wasn't going to anger a lot of students. And I think we did a really good job of that. And it's what I'm most proud about for the walkout is that, even the people that detract from it and think it was a bad idea, there's really nothing they can be mad about. We didn't say anything that riled them up, and I think that was this administration's main concern, was making sure that everybody would be okay with what happened.
Okay. And what were the things that your group was trying to accomplish by doing this event, this action?
A little bit of just expression of maybe disappointment and anger. A lot of it for me was just inaction by our legislation, the fact that it's been a stalemate for so long and nothing has occurred. And this issue's been an issue for a long time. But also part of this larger movement, I think the Parkland students really, what they said and what they did started something different. This has happened time and time again, but this time the students that were victims came out and spoke against inaction and stuff like that, and that really got us thinking, we should join them. We should show that, students at our school are behind them, and that's what we did.
Very good, thanks. Well, David, many people are struck by the passion that's being brought to this issue by the students and their ability to articulate what they're trying to accomplish. Do you think, is this a very unique circumstance or a unique time, or is this sort of something that happens or reoccurs time and time again across?
Sure. Well,
history?
Let me begin just by saying on the idea of passion, I'm really impressed with our guests here because while I'm sure that they do feel passionately about this issue, both groups of students seem to have carried out their walkouts in a very planned out and rational manner. It wasn't just a sort of an emotional purging that happened, but they had a message to get across and they thought carefully about how to get it across. So I'm really impressed with both of you for speaking so well on this subject. Well done. So I'm trained as a philosopher, not as a historian. There's my disclaimer. But as a philosopher, I care about getting things right. And so I did do some research before I came on the show tonight. And while I was able to find many historical examples of college students being involved in political activism and protests and so on, I really did not find many examples of high school students or even younger students being involved in this kind of thing. The two that I would mention were both from the 1960s. In 1963, high school students in Birmingham, Alabama, organized something called the Children's Crusade, which was part of the broader civil rights movement going on at the time. And they were trained in nonviolent methods of protest and demonstration, and actually those nonviolent methods were met with a violent response on the part of the authorities. So that was a very dramatic historical moment. They were successful in bringing about some desegregation in the city of Birmingham. So that's a great example, an inspiring example to look for. And I also would like to mention another example from the anti-war movement. In 1965, a young woman in a school in Des Moines, Iowa, wore a black armband to school to protest against the Vietnam War, and her school administrators told her that she couldn't do that, and she disagreed, and the case ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, which decided in 1969 that students' rights to free expression do not end at the schoolhouse door, but students have the right to express themselves freely. So,
sort of paved the way for what happened a couple weeks ago.
Yes, except for the fact that I really could find very little in terms of a historical record of organized protest by high school students or middle school students in between 1965 and the present. So that's a long time. Anecdotally, I know that I participated in some anti-apartheid stuff in the 80s when I was a high school student, but you know, in the absence of social media, and I'm not sure what other historical differences between then and now, it didn't, I think it was really college students who ended up leading the student movement for that cause. Rather than high school students. So yeah, I think that what students are doing today is largely unprecedented, which makes it all the more impressive you know, to me.
Well, and you brought up that the word social media again, and you mentioned that this all started in a group chat.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit here. How does social media kind of how is that a game changer for how people are able to organize, and maybe most especially younger generations who are very comfortable with group chats and tweets and all sorts of stuff?
Yeah, I think maybe Washes is a poor example of social media usage. We tweeted, sure, but it really wasn't the main method of getting word out. It was really, you know, word of mouth. Literally telling kids that this is when it is. But more so, it helped in coordinating the speeches and like actually coming up with like a structured plan without like, you know, ways to talk to people not face to face. We couldn't have done that, and it really helped making the walkout not just a mess and organizing it. Also, you see a lot of like Twitter accounts now that are just huge, and their sole purpose is organizing these, you know, student-led walkouts. So social media obviously plays a huge role. Just, you know, a simple retweet from one of these massive accounts can spark a school's walkout like that, you know, instantly. So social media does play a huge role, even if, for my example, it wasn't as big.
Yeah, my example was a little different. How I personally heard about it is a friend, Haven Deal. She's a part of the group that I've been working with. In fact, we have a group of girls that contains Allie Hayes, Haven Deal, Lydia Jackson, and Piper Jackman. And we all have just been trying to work more on getting like a school-wide assembly to, you know, show kids more on how we can move off of this. And I know that Haven and Lydia were the ones that mostly organized the walkout, and they organized it through just like texting people or telling them through group chats and stuff, and that really, I think, helped spread the word a lot.
Well, and one of the things that, you know, as I was looking and reading, so on that day, the 21st, there were walkouts in Cedar Rapids, but also in Texas and other in other communities across the country. Mostly, my guess is, spawned off of some of what the Parkland student or the Stoneman Douglas SLU students were sharing with the greater public. So
that's the difference, I think, that he was talking about. I think these high school students, you know, coming up and speaking out against these certain, you know, politicians and these horrible atrocities is why we're seeing now, you know, such a deep level of activism, you know, down to the middle school level. It's because of these high school students that started it, you know. The 9 or 10 kids from Parkland who are so active on Twitter inspired me, and I'm sure at the middle school level too. Without them, like, they're really where it starts, in my head.
So what are some pitfalls of student activism? And what are its strengths, do you think?
Well, I'm not a student anymore. I wonder if the students should speak to it, especially since compared to them, I'm a social media dinosaur. But I'd be happy to say something if I think of it after you guys want to speak to that question.
Some of the pitfalls, definitely, it's very easy to misconstrue what the message is. I know, me personally, I see a lot of people talk about the walkout that occurred, and they say things that I just don't get. I'm like, they had to assume this, they had to make this leap in logic, that I never made for the walkout. We never intended this message to be sent, but somebody received it anyway. So it's, you have to be aware, like, people are gonna look at the walkout from their perspective no matter what, and they're gonna take it, how they're gonna take it. And just because you do your best to make a very specific message, and one that is even like apolitical, it doesn't always work, and you're gonna get some detractors. It also inspires a lot of just negativity, because you have, every action has a reaction. So every time there's a walkout, some section of students at the school are going to, there was an anti-walkout planned at Wash. It got squashed because it didn't really make any sense, but it's just a good example of how people can take what you're trying to say and give it a different meaning.
And I think that happened a lot at my school as well. There were some people that didn't take our walkout as serious as maybe like they should have. And, the positives, I think, is that, students can actually get involved and for once, kind of feel like they have their own opinion and that their own opinion can be heard some way.
So, Kyra, you started, and I know it was really important for you to share your group names of your friends, yes. Because this is a group effort for all of you. Tell me a little bit more about. You mentioned you're working on getting an assembly. So the walkout was just the beginning of something you're trying to start now?
Yes, well, we wanted to stop and, try and build off of the walkout instead of just stopping and then just having everyone forget about it and just move on. So instead, we just wanted, I think we're going to do it grade level by grade level so that we can, get personal with the students and talk to them about how we can change this and just how they can help around their community and stuff.
Thanks. Any follow-up at Washington?
We've talked a bit about the nationwide walkouts that have been planned for certain dates, like the 21st of April or stuff like that. There's plenty of them. But it's not my decision, and it's not like this walkout is the whole school, And just because I'm on here talking right now about it, it's not my walkout. It's not even like a small group of students. It's the whole school's walkout. So it's not up to me, I don't think, if we're going to walk out on those days. I'm not necessarily a student leader. And just because I help organize and I talk to the administration, which is really the only thing I did that was important, I don't think that kids are going to walk out again, just because my school has 1,300, 1,500 kids, I'm not sure exactly, 400 or 500 walk out. More kids stay behind, and that number is only going to get smaller as you do it more often. Mm-hmm. So I think while it may be redundant, it also might be necessary. If this issue continues, which it certainly looks like it will, more walkouts might be the future.
So, and then maybe this is specifically more pointed towards you, Walker. You are part of a school who has a variety of students who are just about ready to register to vote and really enter into fully the political process. How do you, and maybe you can jump in here too, David, how do those two things connect? You're in the middle of it, and you can talk about it philosophically.
I certainly think that there is more political activism in my generation, my grade, than in previous ones. There is a movement on the internet that a lot of people maybe not are that aware of, but just people like John and Hank Green that really push younger people to go out and vote, even in local level elections, to engage in politics, because that's how you make a democracy work. And a lot of the problems that we have in our country wouldn't be that way if we just had participation. So I certainly think that there is a huge amount. I mean, I know personally kids that are 17, they will be 18 by the midterms. they are excited to vote. They are very, personally, I won't. I wish I could. I'd be very happy if I was, but I know plenty of students that will be. And it's weird, because I assume that in past generations, it really hasn't been that way. It seems like a lot of the feelings towards voting is apathy, whereas now it's excitement. Engaging in politics is something that kids have kind of, for a while now, been slowly pushed towards. People, forming your own opinions and saying them and stuff like that. I think there is change coming from my generation in the voting bloc.
Did they anything to add?
I think that progressive educators in the tradition of the philosopher John Dewey have wanted to get rid of the idea that school is somehow a place that you spend your time but before you enter into the real world, right? They've wanted to say schools are real places and they're in the real world, and we shouldn't create some kind of artificial barrier between schools and the real world. Students will be more engaged with their educations to the degree that those educations themselves connect with reality. And so John Dewey himself was a great advocate for democracy and for democratic practices in education as well as in the arts and in other fields. And so he believed that that students should get all kinds of training in democratic practices, not only voting, but also deliberation and discussion and debate. He wanted all of those kinds of practice he wanted students to practice all of those things to prepare them for participation in their responsibilities as citizens. So when I see students today engaging in activism and protests and so on, that seems fully in the spirit of the progressive tradition in education. And I mean, I'm kind of a fan and advocate of democracy myself, so I'm really supportive of that as well. Yeah.
Well, and just in reflecting here for a minute, when you were speaking, Walker, a little bit about the ways in which the students who chose to speak, how they thought about how they spoke, and tempered their comments in a way as not to, incite
anti-inflammatory,
inflammatory speech. That's maybe something some adults can learn from. As we look out over today's landscape.
I think that Dewey's view of education has not only become a reality, but taken even further, where political discussions are common and oftentimes very productive in classrooms, even in classes whose topic is not related to politics at all. Discussions like that are spontaneous and they occur. And oftentimes teachers do a very good job of moderating and remaining, while like a referee in a sport, very like on the sidelines, making sure that nothing gets said that is just like a personal attack or like a logical fallacy. They just keep it civil and they keep it forward moving. It's certainly the way things work in high school now. Is political discussions are the norm. They're no longer taboo, I think. Yeah,
if I could just follow on to that. What you're saying makes it sound as though there's a great contrast between discussion in schools and discussion on the internet.
Yeah.
On the internet, there are no referees, and unfortunately, there's much less civility than a lot of us would like, which means that for those who enter into debates in that setting, it can be a somewhat bruising affair. You are exposed to political passions in a very raw form, or you can be exposed to such passions. It seems like that bullies can have a big effect. They can keep people from expressing their views in a productive way. They can it's like the bad money chases out the good money. The loud bullying voices can chase out the calmer, more constructive voices. And so as useful as the internet is for giving students a voice and letting them tell their own stories, like Kyra was saying, and as useful as it is for practical organizing purposes, like Walker was saying,
There's a shadow side to it.
there's a downside to it as well, which doesn't mean that we abandon it, but you know, we all should do everything we can to promote civil political discussion on the web.
So that actually goes correct right into my next question, which is, of course, there's been pushback on all of these walkouts and various voices. Everything from characterizing student voices as very naive and short-sighted to charges being leveled that students are merely being mouthpieces for adult agendas. And are not doing this of their own free will, but are instead of being highly encouraged or manipulated even. And even some who were out there accusing Parkland students of being crisis actors, which is out of hand. So dismissing that last one as completely off the wall. We don't need to even talk about that one. How would you respond to the other two? This idea that student voices are sort of naive and short-sighted, and once you grow up, you'll know how things really work. Or the fact that some say, oh, well, these young people, they're just parroting adult voices, or they're being used in some way.
Well, I definitely think that an adult role model is what kind of can shape a person's personality and their beliefs, but I know that it's your personal opinion that you choose to, at the end of the day, it's your choice. And, it was a student-led walkout, all this stuff was student-led, and the idea was created by students, and I think that's what is important at the end of the day.
And supported then by the administration, or made safe and
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I would just say, what I said in my speech I gave during the walkout, I said cynicism is easy and activism is hard. So it's really easy to sit there and look at these kids, going out and being active in politics and just say they're, especially crisis actors, they're just parroting what their parents or their teachers or their principals say. Well, no, I mean, it starts with the students. And sure, as a philosophy, teacher, you probably know, like, a child's, like, political views stem very, like, closely to their parents. They either oppose them directly or they take them further in the same direction. And I think that's true, but it's not, it doesn't mean that my views or student activism is not helpful. It's not like I'm a robot or students are just mindless. They're still human beings, and when they are on their own, they're going to remember this activism. It's going to shape them in the future. And to think that, to make what they did, nothing is just absurd. To look at that and think that, oh, they're just parroting is ridiculous.
Yeah, I have two things that I would like to say about this. The first one is kind of a dry philosopher's point.
1 minute.
1 minute. Okay, I'll be brief. The first point is that to dismiss student voices as naive or uninformed or just mouthpieces for someone else, that's a classic example of an ad hominem attack, right? That's a way of distracting attention away from the message that the students are presenting and paying attention to something that really doesn't matter. I mean, even if students are naive or parroting what their parents say, their message is still legitimate. Okay, yes. I'll save my other point.
You have to save your second for another show. Thank you all very much. This has been a great conversation, and we could keep on going, obviously. Thank you to all your panelists, for your insights and your time. For the two of you, Kyra and Walker, best wishes for everything you're going to try to be doing in the future. I can't wait to see how you and your peers change our world. And thank you, viewers, for joining us on Ethical Perspectives on the News. See you next time, and take care.